Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to class today. Turn that mic volume down just a little bit. Mic's a little hot. There we go. Thanks for joining me today, everybody. Got a fun one for you today, as I'm just going to be doing a lot of demonstration with jQuery today. So we're just going to be writing a bunch of code. We'll have multiple examples that we will kind of fit into our demo time today. So the big trick here is going to be able to kind of take this sort of stuff that we're doing today and extrapolating on it and synthesizing that learning into being able to implement a little bit of jQuery in your site. And so one of the things about the jQuery module is that it is a multiple week module. So you have nothing due today, so you have a whole nother week to work on the assignments in this module. Next week will be the due date for this module, and we'll start talking about Bootstrap at that point in time as well. And I think a lot of you might really like Bootstrap when we get into that. Usually I end up with a lot of people that take these classes that maybe they aren't, the most creative regularly, or they have some trouble thinking up like colors and, how to make things look good. And all of a sudden they get introduced to Bootstrap and it's really easy and it can make things look good really quickly. And all of a sudden, right, they can make super cool, nice looking websites with just this extra tool that we use built on top of it. But today, as I mentioned, we are just going to do some coding, just going to do some demos. You can see here I'm in a Visual Studio Code window. I've got a project folder here ready to go to accept my files for my project. We'll go ahead and we'll do this project today. We'll get several different jQuery examples into here. And we'll also go through, again, the process of, getting things onto GitHub and whatnot. So that's going to be, our big goal for today. And our project for today is going to be a to-do list app. So we're going to make a little to-do list app. We'll code up a little interface in HTML. And we will, write some jQuery to do some different things. We'll write a jQuery hover, again, just to kind of refresh what we did last week. And I think I'll do it long form. Whereas last time we did things with the hover function, which is a, it's like a shorthand function. Today, I think I'll do it in the long form, just so you can see how that works. We'll look at taking text from an input and putting it into the to-do list app, and we'll look at just ensuring that the other thing that we want to do is we want to be able to either cross off or remove completed items. This is going to be basically 95% of a full completed app that somebody might put online. Right. The only difference is that we won't be using local storage to kind of save data from what we're doing here. That would be kind of outside the scope of what we would be doing here. So we'll save that for Web 2.15 in the fall. Kind of looking at local storage a little bit there. However, you know what? Another thing that people like to see a lot is a dark mode toggle. So we'll do a simple dark mode toggle today as well. That's a really easy jQuery example that you can shoehorn into any single project is a dark mode toggle or a light mode toggle. So, when you're trying to think of scripts for what you're going to turn in for your project, that's an easy one that you could implement into basically anything as well. So let's go ahead and create our project. We'll go ahead and initialize Git in our folder here once we create our files. And we'll just get to work creating this application. So I'm going to start out by opening my folder, opening my project folder. So I'm going to go to File and then Open Folder. And I'm going to find my folder on my drive, which this is on my external drive G, with my summer class, jQuery 2-to-do app. Select folder. Yes, I trust the authors. There's currently nothing in this folder, right? It's just my project folder. So I can do as we've done previously and add some files into here. We'll add an index.html. We'll add a style.css. And we will add a script.js. And we'll go ahead and put our HTML boilerplate inside of our HTML using Emmet. So we'll exclamation point there and hit enter. That will give us our HTML skeleton. We'll go ahead and change the title here to like maybe to-do list app. And now I think we're good to go ahead and start go ahead and initialize this project to Git and get an initial commit in here, just so we have this base project state saved. So in this folder, we'll just open our Git bash. And we will... Well, I didn't mean to close that folder, but I guess I did. So, but it's fine anyway, because we can run everything that we need to from here on out. So I think we'll be fine. We will just run git init, do our initial add, git add period to add everything in the folder, and git commit -m. This is our first commit. All right. So now we've created commit C28396D. So we have that version in our project here. Good. So now we can go ahead and start working with this, and we're just going to start out by making let's start out by doing something jQuery related, right? So let's start out by adding the URL to reference the jQuery file so that our computer knows which JavaScript to use as the library here. So we're going to go grab the link to the jQuery library from the jQuery.com site. If you'll remember back to last week, we did this last week. We click on the big orange button here on jQuery.com. It gives us all these different ways that we can implement jQuery. We can get it from here, right, from the jQuery.com site. We could also get it from Google, Microsoft, CDN.js, CDN, and JS Deliver. Last week we used the one from Google, so let's just use the regular jQuery one this time. I will take the minified version here and just copy that to my clipboard. And so now I can just paste that before my closing body tag here. So we'll just paste that right in there. So now we have the link to the jQuery library in there. And then immediately after that, I'll go ahead and add my script. Script.js file that we're using for this particular project. So the script for that is going to be src equals script.js and /script. And so remember, one of the things that we said last week is that we always need to have this link first so that our browser loads the library before it loads our script. So when it sees our jQuery that we write ourselves, it can reference that library that we have here to reference, and it knows exactly what we're talking about. The other thing that we will want to do is add our style sheet link. So that would be link rel equals style sheet href equals style.css. And that should get us there. So now we have just, the baseline that we need here, just for us to be able to kind of get going and get working on our project here. If we want to check and make sure we did everything right in terms of where we put our JavaScript and all that kind of fun stuff, one of the things that we could do here is add just a little quick alert script into our script.js file. We can put it behind the document ready function that we talked about last time. And so when the document loads, and it loads in our browser, then it will just pop up our alert box there. And so remember, whenever we start a JavaScript that needs to start loading and listening when the page loads, so whenever we're going to use something that has a hover or an on-click or something inside of it, or the hover especially, right, because that's something that, our page kind of needs to start looking for. On page load, we will discuss an instance today where where there is something that we have that we don't want to put into our document ready function. But for basically everything else, we always start out with our document ready function. So that's $parentheses document. And remember that document is the root of our DOM right there, right? The DOM being the document object model. The root is the item that's at the very top of that tree that we looked at last week. It's the document itself. And so when this document is ready, we will complete the following function. And so what we wrote here is jQuery, right? So if we put some regular JavaScript inside of here, regular JavaScript and jQuery work together, right? Because as we said last week, jQuery is just a library that's written in JavaScript. So it takes a lot of the things that we do in JavaScript a whole lot and just puts it in to predefined functions, and takes things that we do multiple times and just gets them ready for us to where we can use them a lot easier than we otherwise would be able to in JavaScript. So we can kind of use regular JavaScript, or what, as we call it, vanilla JavaScript, and jQuery together, right? So I can just, one of the basic JavaScript things that we learn about in Web 1.15 is the alert function. So I can just use the alert function here to pop up a little modal in my browser, and just let me know that everything is working. Just so we can kind of see what's going on here. So ideally what would happen here, right, is if we've done everything correct, since this stuff here, that we have our wrapper function here, our document.ready, since that's jQuery, it's going to need that jQuery library to be able to understand what that is. But then the alert function here that we're calling is just vanilla JavaScript. So if we have implemented our files here correctly, we should get, let's go ahead and start that live server. A little pop-up box that pops up in our browser that says it's working fine, right? Which we do here. And you can click OK, and that can go away. And we see that every time I refresh our live site, I get that box. So since my code needs to know that this document.ready function is JavaScript, or is jQuery. And we have that means we've implemented our jQuery library properly, and we can go ahead and continue on with the rest of our project. So what I want to do first here is just kind of code everything up, right? I just want to make a super basic application. We'll code up a GUI using HTML. And then we'll add some other stuff to it. Make it look nice with a little bit of CSS. Then we'll get really deep into our jQuery. So I'm going to move kind of quickly through some HTML here. So we'll start out with just kind of the standard structure that we've been working on. Over the past couple of weeks, my basic standard website structure, where we have a header, a main, mouse is just a little bit sensitive today, might need a reboot, that's fine, and a footer. So now we have a section for my header, a section for my main, a section for my footer. We'll put in a section tag here. Give it an ID of input underscore container. And that's where we'll put our form fields. We'll put our button and our input form field here. We'll have another section here that will be for our output. So we'll give it an ID equals output container. And inside of that, I am going to put an unordered list that will give an ID of list. And that's all we need here, right? In terms of the HTML for this part, we're going to take all of our list items and we're going to put them in dynamically using jQuery, because that's going to be, what we have here for our to-do list, basically. If I want to, right now, right, I can just put something in here really quickly. Like I can just add a list item really quickly. That's just a, sample list item. So I can style it and make it look right and make it work, make it just look good before we start writing our jQuery. So we'll put a nice big H1 in the header. We'll call this to-do app. And in the footer, we'll just put a little copyright information. So we'll make ourselves a little paragraph. And we'll, let's see here, that would be, and copy, semicolon, Mr. Ramsey, 2022. And so that's really all the HTML that we need for this right now. I'm going to add a little HTML to it later when we get to the end and we look at doing our I need to put my form field in there, don't I? I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself. I do need to put my form inside of my input container. So let's go ahead and do that. Let's put an input type equals text box. Or input type equals text, not text box. Text box is the big multi-line text box. So input type equals text. Class equals to do in name equals to-do in. And let's go input type equals button. Class equals list add. Name value for a button like this equals add to list. Good. So now I think we have all the HTML I want to use for the time being, right? Nice header. Got our input here. Got one sample list item here, just so we can style everything up. And my copyright information in my footer. So, this is also a nice little exercise just to kind of, just so you can kind of see where things are at different levels of adding code to websites, right? Like all we've done here is we've added just a little bit of code in HTML. We can kind of see our HTML with what we've done here. Those of you who have a little bit more experience with HTML and CSS by now, you kind of understand this, right? Where we kind of start here with what we have, something very basic, something very simple, really like a half a dozen different items here. And then once we style this and add some style sheet to it, it'll be completely different. So I'm going to go into my style.css file now. And we'll just go ahead and start to do some basic styling, right? So we will go and we'll start off by doing some of the basic stuff that we usually do, right? We'll do our reset code. So on my asterisk selector, I'm going to reset my margin, my padding. We'll do a font family of sans serif. And we'll do the box sizing, border box. And we'll make sure we have that saved. So now when we look back at our site, we'll see some things are different, right? Everything's sans serif now. Everything's a little tighter together because we got rid of the default padding. That's okay. Let's go ahead and work with that structure. So since I'm going to put a dark mode switch on this, and we're going to do a little fun hack with a dark mode switch a little bit later on. Since I'm going to put a dark mode switch on this, one of the things that I want to do here, I want to use light colors just to make the dark mode really pop out. So we're going to start with the light mode. All the colors I'm going to use are going to be, dark colored text on a light background. So let's go with our header. We're going to make our header, let's say a height of 300 pixels. Width's going to be 100%, so it's 100% by default. So we don't necessarily have to worry about that. Let's make it a nice light. Oh, what kind of nice light color do I want to use here? Let's make it a nice light. Let's go for like a pink, shall we? So we'll make our background color, let's say FFDDDD. That might be a little too light. Let's try CCCC. AA. Yeah, that'll work. Don't want it to be too light, then you barely can see the pink that's there. So I think that's really all I need to do for the header there. Let's focus our H1. So that's header H1, so that's any H1 that is a direct child of a header. We'll make that a font size of 3VW. Let's see what 3VW looks like here. That's 3 times viewport width. That's a responsive unit. you all will learn more about that in the fall. So that's pretty good. I think we can make that a little bit bigger. We could probably go like, since the title's so small, we could probably go like maybe even like 8. And let's just center that up. Text, dash align, center. And now we can see how that looks there. It's all right. And so what that VW does, that viewport width, I think we've mentioned it in the past. As my viewport gets smaller, my text resizes accordingly. So as it gets larger and smaller, it resizes accordingly. Since I have a static height here, I can just apply a little bit of margin top to our H1 here to pull it down a little bit. So let's see here what we might want to say. Let's say, actually I think we would want to do some padding here. So padding, top, 100 pixels. Why not? Let's give that a try. Just see what it looks like. So it looks fine there, looks fine there, looks fine there. I think this will work for us for our application. Like, unless we get on like a, if we get on a 4K monitor here, it gets a little wacky. But we don't need to worry about that. That's something that a media query could fix, which would be outside of the scope. So as long as it looks good here, which it does, on just a standard 1080p monitor, we'll just go with that for today. So now let's take our main box. We're going to leave it white. We'll take the back. We'll go back and change the background of the site, of the entire site, in just a few minutes. Maybe we'll make it like some kind of light yellow or something, right? And we will say, okay, main is going to be. It's going to have a width of 80%. And let me just zoom right in here so you all can see this a little bit better. We will center it up vertically using, or horizontally using margin 0 auto. Margin 0 auto. And we're going to give it a minimum height. So that's a min height of something fairly tall. Let's go 800 pixels. And while we're at it, we'll go ahead and take the body of the site and make it background color of bisque. Why not? Let's go with that. Just kind of picking colors on the fly here. And so we'll have to also make sure we set that to background color white. Because remember, default is transparent, right? So if we don't set a background color on our main here, it's not going to show us anything on the background. So we can see a little bit of funky stuff here on the inside. That's fine. We're gonna deal with that here shortly. Let's go ahead and set the font for the entire main. The entire main container here would probably be the best way to do that. So we can set a base font size on the parent here and set that to, let's say 1.8 rem. Let's see what that looks like. Looks pretty good to me. Looks about like what we'd want here. So that's perfectly fine. What I did was I put these two items inside of a section container, so I could take that section container and make it a grid, so we can deal with the width and height of our form field that way. So I'm going to focus this ID of input container in my CSS. So that's hashtag input underscore container. We're going to display grid. And we are going to set a grid template columns of, we want our text input to be wider than our button, so we'll say like 3 frames and 1 frame. So that's 1/3 of the, or it's actually 3/4, I should say, 3/4 of the container width being the first item, 1/4 of the container width being the second item. So now it looks a little something like that. And we definitely want to add a little bit of padding to that as well. So let's add a little bit of padding to our input container here. Padding, we'll say 12 pixels. We don't want it going right up against the edge here, so let's save that, see what that looks like. That's looking pretty good. And we can take these inputs here and we can adjust the height on them. So for that, since we used our form input element here for both of those items, we can just focus the input element selector and give them a height of, let's say, 32 pixels. And then we end up with a little something like that. Right, if we wanted to, looks like we might need a little padding here as well. So let's put a little padding on that. Padding of 6 pixels. So now we have this input field here. We're going to be able to type something into this input field. We're going to be able to click add to list. That's going to add it to our list here. We do need to do a little bit of adjustment to this unordered list. Right, so since I brought my input container here, since I gave it 12 pixels of padding, I want that list here to go even further in. So we're going to focus our unordered list. And we're going to give it a padding of, let's say, 48 pixels. And save that. So now we can see what that looks like. And that works for me. Now, one of the things that we could do here that I kind of like to do is to use, because you can change up your bullet points here, and I always find that to be exceptionally fun. Makes our site a little bit, a little bit more interesting, right? So what I might want to do is to, and again, all of these things that I'm doing in CSS now. Right, normally I teach this concurrently with 2.15 in the fall, so we're like talking about this stuff in 2.15 while we're doing it in here, just to give you more practice, right? So that is one of the things there. And also don't forget, right, I give you all these files in a GitHub after class is over, so you can go back and look at it, and you can pull a version for yourself and bring it up and play with it and all that kind of fun stuff, right? That's the point of being able to give you all of this. So if I look at my list item marker pseudo selector here, which is something we can do in CSS, we've got our unordered list. Since this is the only list item that we have on our page, right, then we can just focus our list item selector and add the marker pseudo selector. So that's list item : marker. We can change the content to be whatever we want it to be. For example, an emoji. So we can change it to be any emoji that we want it to be. And now instead of our standard disk that we see, we should see our little not working. It's interesting. What have I missed here? Content equal. Oh, it's 2 colons for marker. There we go. 2 colons for marker. It's 1 colon for some things, 2 colons for other things. It's harder to remember sometimes. So it's li : marker. And then we can set the content property to be whatever we want it to be. And that'll just give us a little... We can get a special little list item marker with that. So now if we style up our footer here, we'll be good to go. And we can go ahead and start doing our jQuery. Right? We'll actually be at the point to where we can write the jQuery code that we want to write. And I think I want my footer to be the same color and height as my header. So I'll just go up here to header and just comma footer there. So now it'll have the same height and background color. And I will take my footer paragraph, make the font size just slightly larger, and text align center padding top 50 px. So now we have this dealio here. Not bad, not bad, not bad. Works for me. So we have a completed, interface here. So what I want to be able to do is I want to be able to add a little text item in here, click this button, and have it go here. Which looks pretty cool to me, right? So what I'd like to do is I'd like to first change the little highlight here that we're doing for our text box. Right, so normally when we hover over this, this is also something we can do in CSS, right? So we can use our hover pseudo class to work with this, but using JavaScript, this will give us the ability to look at the long form hover that we were looking at last week. So what I want to do is I want to say on mouse enter, make this one thing, on mouse exit, make this something else. And I want to call attention to this item when it happens. But before we do that, I think we're at a point here to where we can save ourselves a state. So let's go back into our bash window here, so we can just add another state, add another version here in git. So that's git add period to add everything, git commit -m built and styled GUI. And there we go. So now we can start working in our jQuery. So there's 2 things I want to remove here before we get going. I want to remove this list item hello world here. I don't need it now after we've styled it, right? We'll be adding all of our list items to this list dynamically. And I want to go ahead and, you know what? I think I'll keep this alert. It's working fine. I'll just change what it says. and maybe we'll just use it to give instructions, right? We'll just put in welcome to the to-do list app. Add your single quote to-do item in the box below and click the button to add it to the list. Right, so now it'll pop up that message instead. And we can start writing our first function. So let's write ourselves a function where when we hover over our input here, when we hover over this, it'll change the color of the border. So in my jQuery, I'm just going to hit a couple lines here, going down below this. Let's see here. Let me remind myself of what I gave that a class of to-do, uppercase I and N. Okay. So we're going to be focusing to do uppercase I and N, a class of that. So in this instance, since we're using jQuery, this is jQuery, right? Alert here is just regular old JavaScript. We can use them together. $, in between parentheses, period, to do in. And we're going to do the long form here, right? Last week we looked at the hover and how we attached two different functions to a singular hover. This time we're going to look at doing a different on-mouse enter for on-mouse leave. Right, so what I want to do here is add a .on. And so on is a general event listener in jQuery, right? It's just saying on some event. Right, so and then in parentheses after that, I can add first my event, for example, on mouse enter. Then I can do some function. Right, so that's going to be comma, function, parentheses, curly braces, we'll use this keyword that we did last time, .css, border, 3 pixels, solid, red, right? Just like we were writing it in regular old CSS there. So if we just saved that to have a look at it, and we hover over this, we can see when our mouse enters, we get that red line. Now when our mouse leaves, it doesn't change back. Right? So we have to write an accompanying on mouse leave event for this. So we would just write a secondary event listener here. So that would be dot to do in dot on mouse leave, the function for that. Accidentally deleted that last closing parenthesis there. We can use this here as well. We can just copy that, bring it into here. 1 pixel, solid, black. So now once we load our site, we mouse in, it gives us that red border. We mouse out, it takes that red border away. Right, and so doing this right here, alternately, the other way we would do that, right, would just be to write the function using the hover shorthand like we did last time. So it would be $sign dot to do in dot hover function yeah comma function yeah there and there. So that's two different ways to do the same thing. I'll just comment out this first where we wrote it longhand here. So you can see the shorthand work, and we can just have both of them in there. Hover long, and then this is hover short. So we see, okay, exact same thing. Right, so now you can see the difference between the shorthand hover class we wrote last week and the longhand, the way we would do it with our on class if we were going to do it expanded and in long form. .hover is just a shorthand for all of this. And so that gives us one of the things that we want to do here, right? When you hover over that input, it's going to give you some kind of extra little indicator that, you're hovering over the box. Easy peasy. So let's write ourselves another function that will, when we click our button here, take whatever's in here and put it in the list down here. It's not as hard as it sounds. So what I want to do is I want to focus that button, because that button is the object that's going to have the event happen to it. So that's our item with our list add class, .list add. So what I want to do is I want to tell that button to listen for a click. So in jQuery, that's going to be $sign parentheses dot list add dot on click function. Right? So what we have here is we have the item that we are focusing. We have our event listener. We have our event, and now we're starting to write the function that runs on that event. So the first thing that I want to do is I want to grab whatever data is in our input is in our text box. So I want to grab that value that's in that box at the point when we click on this button and put it into a variable. So I'm going to create a variable here. We're going to scope it to the function, so we're going to use our let keyword in JavaScript. So we're going to say let in val equal let's see here, that's to do in, that's $sign parentheses quotes dot to do in dot val parentheses. So our dot val parentheses here is going to get the value of whatever's in that text box at the time the button is clicked. We'll put it in this variable, and then all we need to do is take that and append it to our existing unordered list, which I believe we just called list. Yeah, we give it an ID of list. So from here, again, we're just going to $sign. This time we're selecting an ID instead of a class. So this would be hashtag list. In jQuery, we have an append function, so this would be dot append. So with an append function, right, it's different than the text function that we looked at last week. Right, with that text function, it took everything that was everything that was in that element out and replaced it with that text. With our append function, it just adds to the text. Right, so if we're doing regular JavaScript, right, it's the difference between equals and then plus equals when we're adding an item to an existing element. Right, so we're gonna take and we're gonna put our list item tags, and we're gonna concatenate that with the value of inval, and close our list item tags. And that's all we actually have to do. Right? JavaScript or jQuery makes this super easy. Whenever we click on this list add button, it's going to take whatever value is in the to-do inbox at that particular time. We could add a little something else to this, right? We might do that here. Because as we stand right now, it's going to take whatever is in that input box and put it into our list, even if it's nothing. Right, so if we look at this now and we just click add to list, or I need to save first. If we look at this now and we just click add to list, it's just going to add a blank item in there. And if we add, here's something we want to do, and add to list, it's going to add it. Something else, add it to our list. Super cool, right? And so as long as your browser is open in this one window and you don't refresh and you don't close it, it's going to hold your list right there as part of the website. But I think one thing that we want to combat is this right here, where we have our list item without anything in it. Because even if there's nothing in that box there, it's still going to add something to the list. And so I think all we would really need to do here is just wrap a conditional around this append function to check to see if whatever's in here has a length at all, right? So we write our we can write a conditional here just the same as we'd write it in regular JavaScript. If inval.length greater than 0, then we can do this other thing. So now if we just hit our add to list button here, we see nothing gets added. But if we enter something in the box, then it'll be added to our list. Right? Just makes it a little bit better there, right? If there's nothing in the box, it's not going to add it to the list. But if there is something, at least something, it's going to add it to the list. Pretty cool. So I've got a couple more things here that I want to do before we get done. So hopefully they'll only take me about 15, 20 minutes to do, so we can get done by, 15 after at the latest here. Because what I want to do is I want to be able to remove items from here. Another thing that we might want to do is remove this text from here after you add it to the list. That's another thing that we could do there. Because in addition to being able to get a value, we can also send a value. So we can just take this value, if I remember correctly, and just set inval. Or actually, I think we'd be better off if we just said dot to do in dot val empty quotes. So then it would reset and it would take whatever item is in there out. So if I entered something in here, it would add it to the list and remove it from my text box. Just that simple. So now let's be able to, let's have a look at how we can take these items off or change their styling in some way. And the trick here is that when we're using jQuery and when we're using JavaScript in general, this stuff is going to work on the things that are available when the document is ready. Right? So anything that's been added after document ready, i.e. the stuff that we append here, won't be able to work if we want to do something with them. For example, get rid of them. So I want to try to do two different things here. One of the things that I want to just do is I want to just remove it. Right? So since I'm going to be removing something that's dynamically added, I'm going to go outside of my document ready function. And I'm just going to add a new, just regular old function. Right? So this is just some other function that we're going to do in the course of our website here. We're going to take our, and we're going to focus our list selector. So that's $ list. And then dot on click, we are going to look at all the list items that are in there. So we're going to comma list item. And then we are going to run a function. So we're going to be looking for a click inside the list. If there is a click on a list item in the list, we're going to run a function. And let's just start off by trying to remove it. So that's going to be this, i.e. whichever list item you clicked, dot remove. We have this nice predefined remove function in jQuery. So it'll just take it out of our list for us. So if we give this a try here, we can just add a few things to our list. Let's go C, D, and if we completed something from our list, we can just click that item and it goes away. Click that item and it goes away. And we can add stuff back if we wanted to as well. Pretty cool to-do list, right? Another option for this, right, if we didn't want to just remove it, we could also just strike through it. And so we could do that instead of a remove function here. We could just use our CSS and use the text decoration. Text decoration line dash through. Although that might be something that you'd want to toggle there, so that would be, you know, if it already had text decoration line through, then you'd want to be The words have escaped me. If it's already marked out, then you'd unmark it, and if it's not marked out, then you'd mark it. So let's comment out this dot remove here, and let's try that. And so one of the things that we can do with JavaScript in general that we've talked about before is that we can use console.log to get an understanding of what my computer is reading. So if I were to add a this dot .css text dash decoration comma line dash through, and then immediately also log to my console. So console.log this.css text dash decoration. I can see what calling that says. So let's go ahead and open up our console. Inspect element, console. We'll add some A's. We'll add some B's. We'll add some C's. We'll mark one out. And then it says here that this is not defined because I forgot to put parentheses around it. So let's save that. Let's try that again. But we saw there that our initial thing for text decoration has worked. We can mark one out. You can see it marks it out. And we can see it has solid, line through solid RGB 0000. So now we can use that if we wanted to as a condition. That will allow us to undo a decoration, right? So we can write if this dot CSS text dash decoration equals what we just saw there in our console. Then we can toggle it, right? We can say that this dot text decoration equals what's the default? Is it just none? Let me look that up really quick. Yeah, let's go with none. Else we'll put the line through it. So now we should be able to toggle if we did everything right. And I kind of added this in on the fly because it was just an idea that I had on the fly here, so I might have messed this up. But we'll find out. So I should be able to click that, put a line through it, click it again, and it unline it. Which is pretty ideal for a to-do list app, because maybe you clicked something accidentally. Instead of adding it back in, you can just undo it. Pretty good. Right, so the only thing that we have left to do that I want to do really quickly is I want to do the the words are leaving me. It's been a long week. I want to do the dark mode. I want to do the dark mode selector. So in order to do this, I'm just going to add a little bit of code into my HTML file. I'm just going to add a little checkbox up here into the header. So we're going to put another input type up here. Input type equals checkbox. ID equals dark mode DM. And we'll just have the little, for sake of time here, we'll just put the little checkbox there just for a proof of concept, right? So now we have just a little checkbox up here. That's also made our text go down too far, so let's change that in the CSS. We'll change that, let's see where it's at, that padding. Here to, let's say 60. Right, you'll see we have a little checkbox up here at the top. And so when that box is checked, I want to go into dark mode. When that box is unchecked, I want to take it out of dark mode. And so since this little checkbox here is there, when the document is ready, I can add that back inside of my document.ready function here. So I'm going to go before that last one there that corresponds with this document.ready up here at the top. And I'm going to add something to check to see if that box is checked. So on that dark mode checkbox dot on click, right, when it's clicked, I want to do the following function, and I want to check to see if that checkbox is checked. So if this dot is, which is pretty nice in jQuery, colon checked, right? Colon checked is a pseudo class in CSS. It checks to see if something is checked. So if it is checked, it will return true. If it is not, it will return false. And now I've got one cool line of code here that will take my entire site and put it into dark mode. So what I want to do is I want to focus my HTML selector. So that's HTML, that's the root of our site. Dot CSS. I'm going to add the filter property. And I'm going to set that filter property to have these values: invert 1 in parentheses, and also hue rotate 180 degrees. else we're going to reverse it, right? So else, we're going to take that same thing. Invert is going to be set to 0. Hue rotate is going to be 0 degrees. So this will invert everything and rotate the colors, so it puts them into a more appropriate dark mode palette. This brings everything back to light mode. So if we save this, all right, we click OK here. We click our checkbox. It flips into dark mode. Even things we add later are in dark mode. We can cross things out, and if we undo it, it takes everything and flips it back. So that's a really easy, really standard dark mode switch. That is, something that you could put onto every single site that you make. That's super easy. And that leaves us with a pretty complete application, right? Like the only thing that I would do with this application that would be more complex than what we have it at now, if I was going to make this application for real, would be to build in some local storage for this, to where it would actually save my to-do list between browser sessions. But again, that's beyond the scope of anything that we would do with jQuery in this class, right? It's beyond the scope of anything that we've learned in JavaScript so far. But when we look at this, this is actually not a whole lot of JavaScript that we've written here. And that's thanks to jQuery, right? Like it's pretty easy to create this to-do list application just using what we've learned here. So now if we save everything, file save, we can go ahead and update our version here in our bash window, right? Git add period, git commit -m finished application. We'll go to github.com now. We'll create a new repo. We'll call this new repo ToDo Summer 22 and create that repository. Follow our instructions here. So we'll add a git branch -uppercase M main. We'll copy and paste this line. And then we'll copy and paste this line. And it'll send everything all the way through. And there it is. We can go to settings, set up pages, main, and save. So now we have this link here to submit for a live page, and the repo link here to submit for a repo. And so that's all that I have for you for today. We'll send all this out to you. Remember, nothing's due today, so you're good. If you have any questions later, or if you have any questions in the chat here with me, feel free to go ahead and ask. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next week.